Good morning or good evening, everyone, and welcome to Peer-to-Peer UK Hong Kong 2022 Symposium. This is our sixth session. It's entitled Worldbuilding and Wellbeing, and it's hosted by Peter Bonnell and Helen Starr in conversation with artists Seema Mattu, Eason, Tsang, and Uma Breakdown. I'm Sarah Fisher. I'm Director of Open Eye Gallery and one of the organisers of Peer-to-Peer, together with Lindsay Taylor at the University of Salford Art Collection. And before I hand over to Peter, there are a few housekeeping rules I'd like to share with you. Firstly, the session is being recorded and it'll be uploaded later onto the Peer-to-Peer website. So please do share the website link with people. Secondly, we actively encourage questions and you can submit these via the chat function at the bottom of your screen. And thirdly, can I encourage you to share social media? And if you do that, could you use the hashtag peer-to-peer UKHK 2022. So now I'm really delighted to hand over to Peter to chair this session. Peter.
Thanks so much, Sarah, and it's a real pleasure to be here today. And I've got the great pleasure to introduce three fantastic artists and my co-chair, Helen Starr. So Helen, do you want to do an intro to yourself and our many times we've worked together and so
on? Sure. My name is Helen Starr. I am a tall brown woman of Indigenous, Carib and African Yoruba descent. I'm a world building curator, like my dear friend Peter Bonnell. And today I'll be wearing I'll be wearing my research hat on well-being. I was part of the team that won the 2021 Wolfson Economic Prize, which was looking at the future of hospital and care in general, and in particular, research around how design can be the third carer. I'll hand over to you, Peter.
Wonderful, thanks, Helen. So my name's Peter Bonnell. I'm the Quad Arts Program Manager. Quad is a cinema, gallery, cafe, bar, workshop centre based in the city of Derby, opened in 2008. I'm also the director of Format International Photography Festival, numerous kind of hats. I've been relatively new in post at Quad since May this year, but for 10 years before that, and a number of years before that too, I was a curator and a senior curator working on a range of exhibition projects and so on. I should also say that Quad was part of the Peer-to-Peer Festival in 2020, where we put forward a commission with the artist Daniel Brathwaite-Shirley, who we exhibited the solo show at Quad. Helen and I co-curated that together, worked on that together at the end of last year. Quad has had the great pleasure of working with Blind Spot Gallery in this iteration of Peer-to-Peer. And together we spoke, myself and Nick Yu from Blind Spot, and I'm afraid the guys from Blind Spot, through a variety of different sort of things going on, were unable to join us today, but I'm here as well to represent not only just Quad, but the Blind Spot and the partnership as well, and the great work we did with Peer-to-Peer. And we came together and thought how we'd like to cross over ways of working between our organisations. So Quad has a great focus, of course, on photography and lens-based media through the Format Festival. We're also working with artists with digital media, creating new media, new technologies. And of course, that's where Helen and I really first came together and working on a project with Eason Art Centre. And this is a little bit, and I'll go into details in a minute, where Uma comes in as well as Seema and Eason. And for the Blind Spot and Quad partnership, we thought about the artists and the things that we have in common between Blind Spot and Quad, and that was, of course, again, photography, lens-based media, but emerging technologies, digital ways of working, creating new media. And from the Blind Spot side, Nick and the team suggested Eason, who again we thought was wonderful work and a wonderful project that Eason's done. And we suggested Seema Mattu, who is going to have a solo show at Quad in the summer of 2022. 23, and the theme for that season is world building, and it's part of our MPO, fingers crossed everyone, and very much part of Quad's ethos is the notion of well-being. So when Helen and I was thinking about putting this panel together after being invited by Sarah, my first and only person I thought of I'd want to co-chair this with is my dear friend and long-standing collaborator, Helen Starr. Because again, we both share those great sort of themes and ideas in world building and well-being. And again, that's an ethos that is shared, of course, by Blind Spot Gallery too. So we came together, we commissioned these two artists, Seema and Eason, and from that really came that world building and well-being ways of working. And to sort of broaden out the discussion, we're also working with UMA going forward in 2024 with a show at Quad. And the sort of season of that year about sort of, again, well-being, how we exist in the world, how we manage our lives in that world, will be influenced a great deal by UMA's work. And UMA has an exhibition with Wisen Art Centre on at the moment. Go and see it, Earth AD. It's fabulous. It's a partnership with Fact Liverpool. So all the artists that Helen and I invited to come and talk with us today, of course, the artists that are part of peer-to-peer as well, all have many things in common, and all artists that we're nurturing and working with and have great relationships and are going to go on to do great works with us at Quad and working with Helen and other organisations too. So within this talk today, we want to try and tease out some themes and ideas that Uma, Seema and Eason are working on with their various current works and commissions and so on. And Helen and I have a number of questions, and well, when I say number 3 going forward, so we'll get to them in a short while. But what I'd like to do is for each artist to introduce themselves in turn, and they'll either show some slides now or maybe some slides alongside some of the questions a little later on. So Seema, would it be okay if I just hand over to you if you do an introduction to yourself and your work, your current practices, and maybe touch upon the commission that you did for peer-to-peer as well?
Sure. So I describe myself as quite a gender expansive Valmiki trickster rather than an artist whose practice is framed as a theme park, which is called Seema World. And Seema World is an immersive multi-channel realm and streaming facility, and it's comprised of the sort of mimicry of multiple amenities and services which act as portals to a specific aspect of Seema World. In terms of the commission for this project, I created a role-playing game which involves characters from the narrative that I'm building, and also sort of folkloric characters within Punjabi societal, I guess, literature, music, and also just, I guess, hearsay. The nature of it being folkloric means that iterations of the same story have been passed down, and in doing so they change and they evolve, and my iteration kind of marries my characters with those perceived characters, and so the player is invited to play as a tragic lover, so you get the option of 4 characters, and by playing as one of them, you go through a series of questions which are prompted by my characters, and it's all about sort of secret keeping and also secret sharing with a view to achieve immortalization within the narrative. Is there anyone you'd like me to hand over to, Peter? Or?
Yeah, well, that's brilliant. Thanks, Seema, so much. Uma, would you like to go next? And if you have any image you want to show now or later, that's fine as well. Thanks, Seema. Oh, you're muted, maybe, Uma.
Am I still muted?
No, that's better.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, yeah, so hi, my name's Uma. My kind of interest in well-building and care is pretty deep. I did a PhD on role-playing games and care and horror films. I'm really interested in kind of emotion and affect and stories that are kind of unstable and stories that allow a kind of agency in the audience, and the kind of breaking down of any distinction between a kind of artist as the person making and the audience as the person making. I'm interested in world building in terms of it as being like a kind of a anti-colonial practice, a way of like making things that are unstable and collectively owned, and able to be branched and forked and expanded. As Peter said, I've just opened a show called Earth AD at Wysing Arts Centre in Cambridge, and it's going to be moving to FACT next year in Liverpool, and then to Quad the year after. And this is very much informed by those kind of like strands of my kind of research interest. I've got some nice photos of the install. So Earth AD is like a multi-part modular thing. There is an installation, which is the stuff that's on the screen, that's a mixture of kind of objects and animations, and like there's like a really small kind of video game. And then there's a digital part of it that's launching a little bit later on, like an online based WebGL game that's another kind of approach at the same material. And as the show moves around, the web part of it gets reconfigured, like into, it's almost, I kind of think of it as like an additional DLC kind of drops each time that the show moves. Yeah, some more pictures, and here's some of the kind of images, the kind of animation loops. I'm really interested in these like fragments, things that imply like a story beyond what's there, things that like that imply not only the story but a kind of interface. That idea of like the diegetic part of a thing, the story that's within the world, and then the story that's outside of that. So, you know, you're playing Doom and you've got the thing you can see on the screen, but there's also the kind of the interface that you have to engage with and how that's stylized and how that tells a story. So I'm really interested in these kind of things within and beyond the world. Yeah, that's probably it. I don't want to talk too much. So I think if that's enough of an intro, I will hand over. I'm just looking at who I'm going to hand over to.
Thanks, Seema. Yeah,
Eason.
that's absolutely, yeah, to Eason. Thank you very much indeed. So over to you, Eason.
Hi everyone. I'm Eason. I'm from Hong Kong. I'm mostly doing some lands-based work, and mainly focused on the exploring the boundary between the virtual and reality, or real object. So maybe I share my screen. Okay, can you see? Okay, so before I introduce my work showing in peer-to-peer, so I would like to share my previous work, which is related to the work in peer-to-peer. So you may see in the picture there's two video works so far. There's a fish here, and then there is a pond in the left side. This is actually a installation, a video installation with 3 objects here. There is two sessions. Here you see is the first session, and the fish and a pond. So this is as like a aquarium system. So the fish needs some oxygens, and the pond provide oxygens, and the pump, and if the fish not here, the pump has no meaning to be here. So they're kind of a relationship that they need each other. And yeah, somehow now it's kind of a stable situation of this installation set. And then so here is the session 2. There's a drill bit. Sorry. There's a drill bit trying to make a hole of a fish tank. So trying to disturbing the equilibrium of the system. Yeah, so and actually this installation is a loop. And they will end with repeatedly, and then that means that the stable situation and then the unequilibrium situation, they will just keep looping. And because these three words are also a video word, so they are also a virtual images. They are actually not interacting each others. So what I just said, the unequilibrium and the equilibrium situation is actually an illusion. So you can see the close-up of these two words. Actually, the fish is I use the macro lens to zoom in the fish body. Actually, the fish is tiny before using the macro lens to magnify it, and then the bump as well. So I like using the camera lens to try to exaggerate the object that I focus on. Yes, okay. Then I'm then going to the work I'm showing in peer-to-peer, and actually this work initial idea was came from the pump. When I was filming the word pump, I found that the bubbles can some interesting things that I found that the bubble can never cause the water surface. It seems like that kind of similarity that the virtual images can never cause another side of the video screen. So basically the idea is start from that, and then another reason would be I found that the bubble burst it seems like fireworks and somehow it is actually reflecting the status of the species inside the fish tank. So I think the bubbles somehow is a kind of a visual representing what is the life status. So this is two reasons kind of make me to give me the reason to make this work. Yes.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Eason. And thank you all, Uma, Seema, Eason, for giving a great introduction to your work and a great start to talk. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to hand over to Helen. Hold on. And if Helen, if you can everyone see? Everyone can see my screen. I don't know if you can see my backdrop.
Can see it.
Can you see my I forgot to say, Helen, that my backdrop is Legend of Zelda. So I see this every day, and I know you use this as a fabulous backdrop and slides to the questions you put together. But of course, for me, Legend of Zelda is just something that got me through the pandemic as a great well-being tool in this amazing world that was created. Anyway, I know you know me well, don't you? So you know that's something I would have really got. Anyway, I'm waffling on. Helen, I'd be brilliant. You've got two great questions here. Then there's a third one from me, as I said. Do you want to hand over to you and you can ask work for the artist question? Yeah.
Sure. I'll ask the first question to Seema, if that's okay. So Seema, do you think the design within your
I've gone the wrong way.
Do you think the design within your works impacts on the viewer's emotional state? And if so, how?
Yeah, so for me, I think that the design within my work particularly the work that I made for peer-to-peer, which is called Love by Law, is bound by its own pace, which is quite a sort of slow banning process of decision making for the player. And the fact that the questions and sort of short puzzles are embedded in the RPG kind of force the player to contemplate and ruminate. So an impact on emotional states is inevitable, really. I guess I can, in this moment, share my screen and just show, that's okay, and just show an idea of what I mean by that. So here are my characters that I built for the RPG. And if I just, these are 3 of the characters which are reoccurring in the sort of overarching narrative within Seema World. And here they are sort of, this is a still of a GIF which acts as a background of one of the pages inside the RPG. And this is, I guess, different iterations of the characters and how they appear in the RPG and how one interacts with them, but also as them. And I think here is the poignant part of this question. It's really about contemplation and reflection, and the questions that I've embedded in the RPG are very much about, I guess, worldly affairs, current affairs, personal affairs, but also they are specific to the character that you choose to play. But for the characters, sorry, for the questions that are like this one, the answers go nowhere. So there's no sort of collection of answers on my part. There's no sharing of it in any way. I'm not really interested in what the answer is, but the requirement is there for the player to proceed within the RPG by answering these questions. And in terms of honesty, that's up to the player. But it's, as I said, inevitable for them to react. And this is still in the RPG of the puzzles that I mentioned. In Punjabi, these are called babbe, and that is basically like, it refers to talking. And it's a game that you play usually at night, and it's a riddle that you figure out by the person proposing the riddle embodies the object, which is the answer to the puzzle. And so you'll see in the RPG that you have sort of visual cues like this background image, and that should help you to answer that question. So that's all to say that yes, I think it does certainly impact on the viewer's emotional state, at least for my work.
It certainly impacted on mine, Seema. I really liked the fact that your questions moved from the wider political to the very personal. Mm-hmm. And I found, for example, having to look up what the word Valmiki means, I sort of got lost in that bit of research, which was very, very affecting. And then going from that to one of your questions, what happened in 2017, and seeing how you put your personal diary in there, which also triggered memories for me. That movement between the macro and the micro, for me, was very emotional. So I guess the next person I'd like to address this question to would be, are you finished, Seema, I should say?
Yeah. Stop sharing with. There you go.
Thanks, that was fab. The next person I'd like to address the question to would be Uma. So do you think the design within your work impacts on the viewer's emotional state? And if so, how? And I would say at this point that the Zelda image in the background, these were intercut scenes which are meant to take you to a place of calm within the Zelda world, so that you can then recover enough to go on to the next level. So it's actually a strategy of orchestrating your emotions so that you don't burn out. Over to you, Uma.
Okay, I better share. Thank you. I'll share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to show an image from the show that I think is kind of relevant, but I wanted to talk about other stuff. I'm not really very good at like talking about my work when it's like so new. I'm not quite sure how to talk about something when it's just, like brand new, but like the idea of like the emotional thing in emotional impact in for a viewer in any kind of experience, something that I'm really interested in. And what the question immediately made me think of is like how in games there are often like these, like you said in Zelda, like there are these like beats where it's a thing where you can kind of like have a moment of like respite. And I really like those. I really like those in like video games, and I really like how they work in like other kind of like speculative narratives, like in horror films and things like that. And I think like things like in the Resident Evil games, there's the save rooms. So there's a room where you're kind of protected and you can't be attacked or anything, and there's no way for an enemy to get to you, and they always have these like really calm music, and you might be in that room with no way that you have the resources to survive the thing that's outside that you've got to do next, but it kind of doesn't matter because you can stay in that room indefinitely. And that's like a kind of mood that I'm really interested in trying to convey in parts of my work. I think of also of stuff like how this is like really apparent in the games by FromSoft, like in Dark Souls. There are bits where you can just sit and it's presented as like a really calm and safe environment while this like maelstrom of stuff is going on around you. And it doesn't matter that the job that you've got to do outside of this feels like insurmountable. You can be in this place where it's like totally safe and calm. And you encounter like where the world building, especially in like Dark Souls, is like dealing with these characters who are also in those bits. They're often people that are dealing with like their own kind of challenges, and they're having a rest, and you talk to them and you have a rest, and you talk and you kind of both like step outside of this thing. And that's like a tone that I'm really interested in. So I shared the kind of picture of the kind of coracle in front of the moon from the show as like kind of a kind of mood, that kind of like dream, that kind of safe dream thing. That's my answer.
Well, thank you. I should describe it. So it's in the show. Are you able to sit within the coracle, or do you just is it just as a sort of sculptural meditation? Is it there for you to look at and meditate on, or
it just hangs from the ceiling, and it was like an image that I was really interested in, the idea of this kind of ancient form of boat that's very small. So I'll describe it. So a coracle is it turns up like all over the world, but I was specifically interested in how it was a kind of like an ancient one, you know, pre becoming Britain kind of this island where I live, cultural kind of object. It's like a very small boat. It's less than a kind of a meter across. It can just about fit one person. It's basically a basket with a skin on it, and you kind of bob around and you use a single paddle, and it's normally used for things like fishing, and it can't really carry very much. And in my show, it's this like very rudimentary thing made out of like really like reinforced and bound plywood, and it's only partially skinned. It's not a like seaworthy vessel at all. It just hangs from the ceiling like a thing that's been used before, and is now like kept, or a thing that's being repaired or something like that. But the idea of the kind of boat bobbing around, thinking about like how that's often like a dream image, like in in Friday the 13th, there's a kind of like dream of floating in a canoe on Camp Crystal Lake, and that being like this kind of quiet kind of moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for me, it definitely evokes a sense of death and horror. I think for me, because of how it's constructed, you know, and the colors of it, looks like a sort of imagined image from stories of the underworld and going down into Hades. And, you know, the person who rows you across the river, is it Styx?
The Styx.
Yeah, because this for me doesn't, yeah, it's definitely quite fascinating and again, very evocative emotionally.
It's very much about relics as well, I think, isn't it, Uma? The remnants of something that's been found and uncovered. But I think you've also talked about, I think even within this show, levels within the work, and Seema, I was playing Love X Law this morning and just finding myself being drawn in from almost from level to level through the riddles of the game. I found that to be really fascinating, and it is that notion of, I've tried to do it myself as a curator before, but curating or managing people around the work, the space. I think for all the artists here, that's something that's very much about what you do as artists, isn't it? You sort of not manipulate, but you work with people and draw them around to at your pace primarily, don't you? But Helen, should we?
We should go on to Eason.
Eason, yeah. Yeah. Do you want to put the question up, Eason, or?
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I share my screen again.
Okay. Hold on.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I think that my works somehow also has some fear elements on it. Because the object I focus on is already a bit of fear already. At the same time, actually, the most of the subject matters appears in my work. Actually, those are fragments that we are easy for ignore or miss in our everyday life. So my work usually use real time or sometimes real time or slow motion sometimes, zoom in and objects and monotone background to exaggerate the impact of the tiny objects. Most of them are actually most of the objects in my works are actually are bigger than the object itself. Pretty much actually. I normally use a macro lens to magnify the objects. So so it seems that it can provide audience can easier to aware the object that they may they may miss or ignore easily in daily life. Yes, and also soundtrack. In my work in peer-to-peer, I have a soundtrack there. Yes. Actually, I feel like the presentations in peer-to-peer is like kind of a broadcasting or like a YouTube channel, something like that. For my personal experience, I like turn on a YouTube channel and do my own stuff, and actually the video or the YouTube channel is actually kind of the media that I spend time but not actually focus on it. So I try to make my work is something like this. So people, audience can just turn on my video, maybe just hear the soundtrack or or if they're interested, they will sit in front of the screen and watch the video. Yeah, or just shut down the video if they doesn't feel interested. So I think that's fine. Yeah, so yeah, I think it is kind of like the what we do with the podcasting stuff. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I did find the video very relaxing. I spent a lot of time in front of it, and a bit like Seema's work, I think all these works affect your sense of time and temporality, which is very relaxing.
Yeah. I think it's kind of equal that because the video is actually real time, kind of real time, not exactly real time, but somehow the sense of time that you watching the video is actually somehow like the sense of time I'm framing the video. So I think this is kind of the equal relationship that I use this time that much time to make an art piece, and then you spend that much time to watch my video. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Eason. We'll go on to the second question.
Yeah.
I'm just aware of time. So the second question, and I'll put this to Seema, is that there are tricks to world building which keep the viewer's attention, such as making sure the physics is consistent throughout an artwork. Are you interested in these immersive effects? And if so, would you share some of the ways, tools and methodologies that you use to capture the viewer's attention?
Yeah, can I share my screen again?
Sure.
Please? Thank you. Just a second. So I think that my take on world building tends to trick itself. In the sense that there's so much sort of layering and subtle symbolism, where it's not just sort of the audience who is invited to unpack the details. I think that the sort of world-built environment and all the characters within it are required to be quite self-aware. So for example, you know how you see in cartoons or animations, you often see characters who wear one outfit, they have one hairstyle, and there's just sort of one iteration of them, and we're expected to just receive them in that way for the entirety of the video or the animation or whatever. I'm actually quite interested in sort of several iterations of the same thing or being, because I think it creates a type of depth that you can believe in, if that makes sense. So for me, within Seema World, it's there's an overarching narrative that I'm building, I have been building for several years, and all of these sort of works are being outputted now are from different moments in time within this narrative, but at the same time, they are evoked and they are presented in different ways. So, for example, these two stills are the background gifts for those are from the world that I built via New Art City last year in September, and they move, but they also speak to different works or video works, if you like, which are sort of speaking about the same thing, but they're different. And so when I make or when I world build, it's with a view to sort of have, there's a fluidity there in the sense that it's not fixed and nothing sort of particularly sacred in that way. It's not specific to any type of work, whether that's a commission or something that is more in development or whatever. It's something that can be applied almost anywhere within Seema World, if that makes sense. I think a good example of trickery is with these characters. who like whereas these characters are specific to this work, these characters are characters who are very much involved in the overarching narrative, and therefore iterations of them in the future will be different to the ones that we see now. And for me, I think that's masterful in terms of using tricks in world building.
Mm. Thank you, Seema. I think we should go straight on to Uma, because I'm processing everything you just said. May come back to that, but let's go on to Uma. Tricks and trickery.
Tricks and trickery. Yes, I'm really into that. I'm really into that. Yeah, I really like. The thing I like about world building is actually kind of gaps. I like the idea of like world building that's like implied. And I often think about there's like a scene right at the very beginning of John Carpenter's Escape from New York. And it's kind of a thing that's kind of quoted quite a lot, where Lee Van Cleef's character is like interviewing our protagonist, Nate Plissken. And he has this like throwaway line where he says, "You flew the Gol 5 over Leningrad." And this is it's a thing where they're like pointing out to the rest of the world the kind of geopolitical system, the way like names work, the history of the characters and stuff like that, and the idea of like what they would do and all the kind of emotive and suggestive resonance of that, but they never explain it. Like it's just dropped in there that there is this place, there is this vehicle, there is this kind of relationship, and it's never explained. And William Gibson was like really into this line. Like I've read interviews where he's talked about it, and in some ways like his approach to like narrative writing and things like Neuromancer are informed by that. Like you kind of mention this stuff and you never really have to go back. You don't have to do like a kind of late Star Wars kind of movie thing where you come back and you find every single loose end and you neatly tie it off. Like you just leave these things out there for an audience to pick up. And that's something that makes me really excited. When I encounter things and it's got these gaps and these things that don't quite work, that's where they stick in my head. So I'm a really big fan of the work of Hideo Kojima. I really love how in games like Metal Gear Solid or Death Stranding, there's like an inundation of data. He drops so much stuff in there, and there's like long stories, expositions, fragments of like lore, and they're not all completely coherent. They don't all necessarily work together, and there's a sense that some of these things are just written down from above by Hideo Kojima himself. They're like, this is the way things work, and maybe some things are a bit more unreliable and they're just from the position of the characters, and you don't necessarily know what's what, but you build like a kind of a coherent sense of the world. And that's something that I'm just like really excited about, the idea of like gaps in a thing, but like gaps that are provocative enough that you want to come back and you want to make new things from it, rather than like a whodunit thing where you've got to reach the end and like go, okay, well, it was definitely this, there's no way about it. Like I really like it when there's like a logical inconsistency in a story.
Well, that's yeah, I can really see that. So when things are ambiguous, you can put some of your own agency and narrative into the story, which goes along with the idea of the mind or the brain being a predictive machine. And that would be quite an interesting outcome, right? Rather than, okay, 1 + 1 is 2. At this point, I think, Peter,
should we go on to the next
I'd really
question?
like to go to your question to Eason.
Yeah, we'll go to Eason. Let me bring up my, thank you, Helen, and let me bring up that slideshow again so you go in front of you. Yeah, here we go. 1 second.
Unless Eason, you wanted to particularly say something, but I think I'd really like to hear your answer to whether the work is therapeutic.
Actually, I do think that artwork should can have a certain quality to beneficial to the mental health. Actually, I like watching lots of the AMR video stuff. Like yeah, so I'm just keep watching and can't stop. but I'm wondering if this is good for the mental health or just killing time. yeah, yeah. So yeah, so but my work is kind of affected by such AMSR stuff, style like stuff. Yeah, because I like things repeatedly and like the robotic motion things. Yeah. Yes. So actually, this is also a question I want to know if this is good for the mental health. At least when I editing the video, what I do, I spend lots of the time on the video screen. My eyes are pretty hurt.
But Eason, when you, I remember we were discussing your work as we were developing it, and you were talking a lot about the pressures of the pandemic and the lockdown and being at home.
Yeah. Actually, the word burn, I made this word during the pandemic time, around April or March. Yeah. So during that time, basically in Hong Kong, there is not strictly lockdown, but a kind of lockdown. Normally, I just stay indoor all days. Yes. So at that time, I spend more time on a fish tank. I mean, I spend more time on browsing my fish tank. Yeah, and then I end up turning into my artwork. Actually, as I just mentioned, the first initial idea was happening when I was doing the pump video. The word pump was made in 2021, which is a year before. But I just put down this idea for a while, and then until yeah, the lockdown. So I have more time, and then I feel like I want to do some work, or I want to do something to kill time or to waste some energy. So that's why I think that this is the moment to make this work. And yes, and I think that somehow the firework light bubbles is somehow reflecting the status, mental status maybe of me at that moment. Yeah, it's like firework.
Yeah, it's very deliberate though in the way in which you've choreographed the work, you've made the work, because it starts off, of course, very slow, then explodes quite literally, and then it sort of settles down again as well.
Yeah,
you know, so it is very contemplative. It is something very soothing, and it sort of seems to, I guess, I mean, we're using a lot of video game analogies. It seems to follow those sort of burst of energy and then that slow down and cool down mode, and then it goes backwards and forwards again. I was just going to go on to I think Uma next. Actually, I was really interested though what you said, Uma, about for example games like Death Stranding, and I'm thinking also Red Dead Redemption 2, although Helen and I know a lot about certain issues with the suffragettes in Red Dead Redemption 2, so we won't dwell on that. But the notion that rather than making video games like, for example, I've been playing Doom Eternal lately, which is quite literally heavy metal bonkers, you know, first person shooter, but Red Dead and Death Stranding and we're all about the notion of taking time within a game to contemplate and to sort of settle the view of the player in the space. But the things about exhibitions and artworks, I guess, is that notion of the challenge, the questions that are asked. But Uma, and then I'll pass over to Seema after that. Do you feel that your work could have that real therapeutic and beneficial effect for the viewer, or is that primarily for you to talk about your sort of, you know, your ideas and themes, and do you expect the viewer to feel those therapeutic benefits similar to what Eason's made in his work?
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know whether mine does that. I'm not really. That's like a thing for other people to get. But I feel like I really like the idea of like the potential for that. I think there's things like kind of like guided meditation are very similar to a dungeon master introducing a scene. They're so often like the same kind of things. Like imagine you're in this kind of space, and then what do you feel? And like trying to create that kind of, use the imagination as a tool to put you in a state of calm or at ease. So I think that is something like really powerful in that. And like you said, like with things like Death Stranding, that does that, the kind of pace of games like that, like they make you take time. So I'm quite interested in how like the gamification part of it, the thing that where it can kind of make you do something beyond what you might have done otherwise, can be used to kind of put the player or the audience or whatever in a state that's good, for want of a better word. But I don't know whether my work does that. It does it for me when I'm making it, and I want it to be welcoming. Fundamentally, I want my work to be welcoming beyond everything else. Yeah, but I definitely think there's a potential in there, and I think there's this, like I said, there's this huge overlap between the idea of like the role-playing scenario and like reconfiguring an audience into somewhere that makes them feel calm.
Wonderful, thanks. I mean, Helen, did you? Sorry.
No. I'm aware of time, so I'd really like
to wrap up
Seema.
Yeah, because Seema, when I was playing Love Explore again, I played it a number of times, and again this morning. I mean, it's it's very much based on a notion of a game and that sort of retro feel of text and images that scrolled down. I remember my Commodore 64. Sometimes it take forever, though yours are much quicker, and there's lots of beautiful animations and stuff in there as well. But I'm playing it and I'm answering the questions, and suddenly I'm finding myself becoming very self-conscious, but in a good way. I almost felt like this my question, my answer is going to be recorded in some way, to the riddles that you put to people. But I suddenly felt myself really involved again, really deeply involved in the work and very much aware of myself. But in terms of the notion of the therapeutic or beneficial or mental health concerns, how do you feel about that?
I thought about this question a lot, because I think that perhaps artworks can be therapeutic. I just don't know if mine are, in the sense that I think that my work is quite bamboozling, and it can be confusing, and it can be a lot. It's most of the time it's just such an outburst, and I think that can be overwhelming, and it can make you feel conscious and things like that. And I think that at the same time, I mean, therapeutic and beneficial are different terms, right? Things can be therapeutic but not beneficial, and vice versa. So I think for me, I'm very interested in, or I talk a lot about like being embarrassing, feeling embarrassed, and sort of being open to that. And so I think there's a vulnerability to my work which might allow for something therapeutic to come of it. But I think for me personally, what feels more important is sort of achieving revelation. I think that this work in particular seems to evoke closure for people, arguably, but it being beneficial would be based on what revisiting the past does for them. For example, so it's a very tricky question. I don't know if it can really be answered fully, especially, I mean, I guess in terms of my work.
Great. Well, thank you for that response anyway, for all of you. Helen, what any closing remarks?
Yeah, I'd like to just thank everyone for this really interesting conversation. And I guess my big takeaway about world building and well-being is that all three artists are using time as a material with different objectives and outcomes. And I think if we think of time as chronos, which is linear, and kairos, which is more like a moment in time, and that all three seem to be very aware with their work of moving between these two types of time, that for me is the really exciting takeaway from this conversation. Delighted and thrilled to be here, Peter. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you for the great questions. Thanks to our amazing artists, Seema and Eason. And we did have a question and I don't know if you saw that or not, Helen, but from our fabulous good friend Ben Hall.
Ooh.
And it's a very long question, Ben. I don't know, shall I see if we can just wrap up with this very quickly, or I've got,
yeah, let's have Ben's question.
That's all right, Ben, that's fine. It's okay, so this is primarily aimed at Uma and Seema. I'm curious about the boundary between the hand of the game maker and the agency of the audience in your practices. You mentioned the safe rooms, Uma, but these are often criticised. The designer conspiring in favour of the player by contriving a situation inconsistent with the mechanical rules of the rest of the world. The antithesis approach Seema described referencing recurring characters. At his worst moments, Kojima's work is similarly self-indulgent and feel the tone of the fandom it instigates as a problematic one and chip to it. It's a difficult balance. I wondered if you have any insights on how you navigate this. So is that primarily, I mean, it's my experience of Death Stranding, I thought it was great, but maybe I wanted those real bursts of things to happen, and it seemed very few and far between, but that was the point. Does that question make sense, Uma, and perhaps Seema as well? Is there anything you'd like to respond to? Can you?
I just want to say that I totally think that's completely right, and my enjoyment of Hideo Kojima's work is completely separate, maybe from his intentions of the game. I think there's something just singular and remarkable about seeing something that's this huge AAA title run on the kind of ego indulgence of someone who's completely without any editorial oversight over them. The stuff is just, and that's what I really like, the fact that stuff can be dropped in there that's that's not felt like it's been given a second thought. That's just raw kind of first idea. Hey, what if it was Moby Dick? Hey, what if this was the reason for this? And then just oh, I've just met this A-list Hollywood actor. Let's write them into the story. I love that because it's completely nuts, but it's produced at a scale that I don't know what else is made. What cinema or television or even novels that are produced at that scale, where someone is not held to account. And then especially with games like Metal Gear Solid 5, where the game kind of collapses, or the funding collapses somewhere in the middle of the game, so the game becomes this broken bit. But yeah, he's completely his approach to some stuff, his writing of women is awful, but as a spectacle, as a thing to watch, it's wonderful. And I think with Resident Evil, I totally get the idea. The save rooms are out of context, but I'm old enough to have grown up playing the original ones on the PlayStation, and the Dutch angles that you have to deal with when playing the game, they're also not realistic. You never get to see through the perspective of the character, and things are deliberately made hard. It's a game that's about playing a film. It's not a game. It's not like a survival sim. It's a game about cinema, and so it can have these bits in it, these intermissions and stuff. I have no problem with that at all.
Seema?
Thank you. Seema? Yeah.
I'll be really honest, I'm not entirely sure how much I understand the question or if it's aimed at me, but I guess commenting on the one-upsmanship and fan labour stuff, my work comes from a position of inferiority when it comes to systems of caste. So for me, the fan labour aspect is not only amusing, it's also arguably needed. So I'm absolutely fine with the idea that these characters and what they represent are forefronted and audacious. I think that the work needs to be, because the themes are so critical. So yeah, I guess that's the only thing I have to say about that. But a really good question.
Excellent question and excellent responses. And I think Helen, I think we need to wrap it up now, don't we?
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Can I just say again, though, just a massive thank you, Helen, of course, Seema, Eason, for your brilliant responses and a lovely discussion. I've got so much from it. And again, to our wonderful peer-to-peer hosts for inviting us to do this, to be part of this great project. So, Sarah, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, all of you. I think there's more questions. I have more questions about this talk than any of the others. And I think that makes for a very interesting talk, doesn't it? So thank you so much, everybody. Our next event, which I hope you all might be able to come to, is on Friday, the 7th of October at 10 a.m. UK time, 5 p.m. Hong Kong time. And it's titled Noughts and Crosses. And it's an interactive participatory event devised by artists at the Chinese University Hong Kong and Falmouth University UK, chaired by Tang Kwok Hin and also Yang Ying. And it's featuring artists chanting and supported by Safi Wilson. So I hope that you can come along to that. And please do share the peer-to-peer website details with friends and colleagues. The website is peer-to-peer-exchange.org.uk. And again, I want to thank everybody for this discussion. It feels to me like I could have pulled out about 6 or 7 things from that discussion and had another one just about that thing. So thank you so much for your contribution today. And we'll say goodbye to everybody and hopefully see you again soon.